All right. We are at 1 minute after 5. Looks like I've managed to make sure that the Zoom is working, our Facebook live feed is working, everything is working. That's all right. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Travis West. I'm the current president of the U.S. Army Ranger Association. This is our winter installment of the USARA Distinguished Speaker Series. We are grateful to have Gary Hinaman here with us today. We felt like it was important that we try to get as many different eras of Rangers represented as possible. And Gary was kind enough to volunteer to speak about his experience in Vietnam with us. Before we launch into today's presentation, I did want to put a quick plug out there. Next week, Tuesday, is the annual Black and Tan event that is being hosted in Las Vegas in conjunction with the SHOT Show. So for those of you who will be traveling to the SHOT Show or who maybe from the area, please feel free to join us. It will take place, like I said, the evening of the 18th. The details about the location and the start time are all listed on the website. There is no charge to pre-register on the website, so please check it out when you get a chance. The other thing I wanted to announce is that we've started to get inquiries about the scholarship program that's coming up in this spring. The committee is finalizing the dates that the scholarships will be made available. The scholarship applications will be made available to those who want to participate. I anticipate that information will be put up on the website shortly after the board meeting, which is also next week. So please keep an eye out on the website for information regarding scholarships. Okay, so let's turn our attention back to Gary. Gary, thank you for joining us tonight. Gary is from Johnson City, New York originally. He volunteered for Vietnam and served from October 16th, 1968 until June 12th, 1971. He graduated as part of Ranger School Class 13-70 and deployed in theater from June 1970 till June 1971. He served with MACV Advisory Team 60. And one of the reasons why Gary caught our attention is because he is the author of the 2020 memoir, The Ranger. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to Gary and allow you to say some words. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. When I got in Vietnam, I wanted to first thank and acknowledge that I didn't see a lot of Rangers over there. I ended up going into combat and being assigned to Advisory Team 60 and then went down to the Regimental Command. I had 3 commanding officers at that time. My first one was Lieutenant Colonel Hicks. He was a Airborne Ranger Special Forces. He was my direct superior. My second was Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. He replaced Lieutenant Colonel Hicks, and Major Andrews was our executive officer. They were all Airborne Ranger Special Forces, and the truth is, without their support, mentoring, and knowledge of what was going on as a young second lieutenant, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you here today. I ended up being embedded in a Vietnamese Infantry battalion, which basically we went out in 2-man teams. I was the lieutenant, so I was the senior advisor, and I had a sergeant. I had 5 different sergeants during that time. And I was very fortunate. The first one I had didn't take very long, and he saved my life within my first week. And I feel that I'm probably the classic example of the what you guys would now call the Ranger qualified infantry officer. In other words, we just went through Ranger school. Some of us went through airborne school, some of us didn't. And we got shipped over both as NCOs and officers. At that time, in the 70s and 60s, there were so few people graduating from, and I was really at the start of the next slug of people going through Ranger school. They were trying to put at least one Ranger trained NCO or officer in each company that was on the front lines in Vietnam. And at that time, in 4 Corps, which was the area I went, I volunteered for a Ranger company in 1, 2, and 3 Corps. And I ended up getting assigned to a regular Vietnamese line unit in 4 Corps, which was the southernmost portion of Vietnam at that time. It was broken up into 4 regions. And I was assigned to the 4th Battalion of the 14th Regiment of the 9th ARVN Division. At the time that I got there, I was advising, and when I got embedded in it, I had a lieutenant who was there. He stayed there with me for about 2 or 3 days, and then I walked off into the country. Came back about 33 days later, not having had a bath or anything else and no contact. Went back out in the country, and our job was to engage. We were down in Kinh Hoa province. It was the southernmost province, one of the southernmost provinces south of Saigon, where the Mekong River emptied out in the Mekong River Delta. At that time, there were about 200-300 what you would call NVA, probably closer to 200 down there operating, and our job was to find, engage, and eliminate that unit. At that time, Advisory Team 60 was home in SEDEC. It was home to all the people who were advising the 9th ARVN Division, and the entire conduct of the war was being conducted at the time that I got there by the South Vietnamese. There's always been a great deal of questions about how they did, how well they've trained, how well they performed in combat, and I'm going to go into that a little bit in my talk here today. I think it would be very instructive to do so. And then the other part of it I'd like to talk about is the hundreds and hundreds of people, of whom my fellow citizens who were in the aviation end of the business. I called in over 104 airstrikes. I called in over 100 artillery strikes, and I called in 42 Dustoffs. And here's my boonie hat. I don't know if you can see the grenade pins on it, but that's how I kept track of all the Dustoffs I called in. Every time I'd do that, I'd put another grenade pin on my hat. So when I came home, I had 42, and that's how I knew. And I knew how many artillery strikes I had because I carried a combat notebook. And I also carried a Brownie Instamatic camera and a Cosmoline rifle bag during my tour. I never ever thought about writing a book. The Ranger is named after the last course that we had in Ranger School. And it was a course about when all else fails, pray and ask the big Ranger in the sky to protect you. And I cannot tell you how true that was for me. It was really a transformational experience to have the answer to prayer and to have God take care of me and protect me. And that's why I called the book The Ranger, after the big Ranger in the sky. As far as that goes, there were only about 19,000 of us who had a Ranger tab when I got my Ranger tab. As you'll remember, the 1st Battalion, the 75th Ranger Regiment, wasn't reconstituted till right towards the end of the war or after the war. So all of us were basically Ranger qualified NCOs and officers in the war at that time. I wanted to talk a little bit about being out with the South Vietnamese, because it was a different experience. They pretty much lived off the land. I did not speak Vietnamese. I had a non-commissioned officer, Sergeant Long, who spoke actually excellent English. The command structure that I was with, my job was to be with the commander of that unit. His name was Major 2. Captain Duck was our XO, and First Lieutenant Lamb was kind of third in charge. At that point in time, I can vividly remember within the first week or two of Lieutenant Lamb coming over and asking me for a cigarette, and we started talking. And I said, I just kind of asked him, trying to make chit chat, said, "Where were you born?" And he said, "Hanoi." And I kind of did the double take. I kind of said, "Are you sure that's kind of the capital of the people we're fighting against?" He said, "Yes." And so wasn't Major 2, and so wasn't Dowie Duck. So the top 3 officers in our unit were born in Hanoi in North Vietnam. Well, the next logical question was, how did you get to South Vietnam? And he said when the communists took over North Vietnam and they separated the country, that Major 2's father had been a doctor. They had shot him. Captain Duck's father was a school teacher. They shot him because he could read. And his father was a businessman. The communists shot him because he owned property. And you remember that at that time there was, you know, under communism, there was no personal ownership of wealth, et cetera, et cetera. I had a number of other instances when this was brought down. I mean, there's no freedom of religion. I was subject to and saw places where in the Tet Offensive, they came into Buddhist monks and machine gunned all the Buddhist monks. In my first 2 months, it was an eye-opening experience to the brutality that the communists were inflicting upon the native population. The South Vietnamese were very, very well received, from my perception, by their fellow countrymen. Whenever you would travel, and there really were very few roads there. Most of the war was being conducted, you know, in the paddies. The second firefight I got in, I was assigned a Vietnamese RTO. The second firefight I got in, we were walking across some large rice paddies heading towards a tree line up in front of us, and we'd actually had contact with that unit the day before. That's a whole other story. But we got about 100 meters behind the rice paddy dike, and we're just about ready to go over it when the NVA opened up on us, and we were out in the open. My RTO, I turned around. Major 2 says, need airstrike. I turned around, put my hand out from RTO to give me the radio, and I look back, and he's running away at about as fast as he can go. So I had to sprint after him under a machine gun and you know, AK-47 fire, tackle him in the middle of the rice paddy, take the radio off his back, and low crawl back to the paddy dike. I remember lying there, and it was about 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall, and about maybe 2-3 feet wide. The rounds weren't coming through it, but I remember there was tall grass on top of it. And the machine gun fire was so heavy that the grass was just it was like a mowing machine was going across there. I called for some Cobras. They came in probably about 15 minutes. We were fairly close at that point to where they were. And the guy came on and said, can we join the party? And I said, they're dug in about, you know, 100 meters from my position. He said, pop smoke. I threw a smoke grenade over the paddy dike, and immediately they fired 2 RPGs at me. That was a transformational experience. I realized pretty quick, whenever you pop smoke, they were pretty intent upon knowing what was going on and going to happen. The Cobra came in, peeled in at high speed, firing his Honeywell grenade launchers, about basically 140 millimeter round a minute. And after the first run, they were up and running for the back into the jungle. We went up, he just came in, hovered over us, and just filled. The second guy came over, did the stain strafing. But after that experience, I started carrying the radio, because I didn't want to have to go on out and start going around and looking for my RTO when the shooting started. One of the things that has always been a question is, were the South Vietnamese an effective military force at that point in time? Major 2 had been fighting for 11 years straight. Captain Duck had been fighting for 13 years straight. And Lieutenant Lamb had been fighting for 7 years straight. These gentlemen were extremely good infantry officers, but they did it very differently than we as Americans would do it. I constantly remember having discussions with Major 2, because I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner with him. Whatever he ate, I ate. And he would constantly turn to me and say, we don't do it that way here. And my mind would just kind of go up in smoke. You know, I just kind of, but it didn't take me too long to realize, if this guy was alive after 11 straight years of fighting, maybe I ought to pay attention to the way he was fighting the North Vietnamese. One of the things that you always hear about is, you know, brutality, all that kind of stuff. I never saw any of that. They treated the local population with dignity and respect, and the local population greatly respected the South Vietnamese Army. On October 5th, the first 2 months, like I said, I was south of Saigon. We were engaged in numerous, I don't want to say firefights, because they were longer than a firefight. They were incidents like I just talked about with the North Vietnamese unit that was there. There were very few people in black pajamas that I saw. Almost all of these people were regular North Vietnamese Army regulars. On October 5th, we came back in. I'd been in the field for probably 7-8 weeks then. We came back in, moved up to our home base. It was the second time I came in out of the field, and got refitted, got a whole bunch of more soldiers, and jumped in a bunch of deuce and a halves and took off. I had no idea where we were going or what we were going to do. We ended up 3 days later, right along the Cambodian border in the Seven Mountains area. So we went from the lowland swamps and wading in and out of tidal channels and mud and whatever. On the morning of October 5th, the sun, we woke up at 5 a.m. We kind of humped out of town south of a small city called Triton, or a village called Triton. And when the sun came up, I noticed that there were these large granite mountains sticking up out of the coastal plain, the Mekong River Delta coastal plain. And at 8 o'clock, in came 8 slicks, 4 gunships, and the chrome-skidded helicopter. Lieutenant Colonel Hicks came off that helicopter along with Lieutenant Colonel Thompson as a replacement that day, and looked at me and said, "Are you ready to go?" And I said, "Go where?" And he looked at me kind of puzzled, and he said, "They haven't told you what you're doing here." I said, "No, sir." He's there. "Come on over. We got to talk." So we walked over, found a little spot outside, on the road down by a tree, just on the perimeter of our troops. And he said, "You see this mountain over here?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "That's Nui Koto. That's where we've been telling people you're going to be going for the last 2 weeks, and we've been bombing it day and night. However, the objective this morning is you're going over here to Nui Jai." And he pointed to a mountain that was straight towards Cambodia, about maybe 2 or 3 kilometers inside the Cambodian border. He said, "The reason you're going over there is this is the main supply base for all of the NVA armaments, supplies, food, etc., coming into South Vietnam." But people didn't realize that, and I don't think they still understand fully, were that in order for the NVA to conduct combat operations in South Vietnam, they had to pre-position supplies and troops and everything in order to have enough, because they couldn't drive down the road because we had air superiority. So it was very important for them to have strategic strongholds. And this was an area where the Ho Chi Minh Trail came in, stopped in Cambodia, and they only had to walk a couple of kilometers across. He said, "Your objective this morning will be to take back the old Special Forces camp that was overrun after the Tet Offensive in 1968. And he said, "Our strategy is simple. You're going in. We haven't told anybody. We think you can get on the ground and get up there fairly quickly. You'll be taking the top of the mountain. We'll be surrounding the bottom, and then we're going to have a pretty good fight over the middle." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Do you have any questions?" I said, "Yes, sir. I don't have a map." Pretty tough to call in an airstrike and artillery strike without a map. And he said, "Here, take mine." He said, I said, "Next thing, I don't have an SOI," which was our call sign. It changed the first of every month. And he said, "Take mine." And the third thing I asked him was, how many of them are up there? And he said, "There's at least 3 NVA regiments. There's 4 battalions per regiment in the NVA TO&E, as were us. And so we had 1 battalion. They had 12, and I figured we'd be outnumbered 12-1 when we got on the ground. And that's about what happened. That morning, our TO&E said we had 28 officers and 369 enlisted men. And that's basically what went on that combat assault. He said, "It may get a little rough for you up there. They're better armed and equipped. They've got a lot more supplies. There's very good troops up there, as best we can tell. Good luck." And I told him, "We'll have the top of the mountain taken just as soon as we get up there, sir." And he started chuckling and walking away and going back towards the helicopter. And that's the last time I ever saw him. He just rotated out and went home. Wonderful officer. Couldn't ask for a better superior officer. Well, anyway, I immediately started orienting my map. We were supposed to go at 9. The LZ was socked in. About noon, it started to clear. And at 1 o'clock, we were on our way. I was shaking and whatever. To make a long story short, 9 days later, there are only 7 officers and 28 enlisted men left alive. Everybody else, well, not alive. Everybody else had been killed or wounded. We lost over 320 some South Vietnamese. We were under constant attack for those 9 days by the North Vietnamese Army. And I would not be here without the support of my fellow Americans. You know, all of our air support was American air support. I had flown combat assaults down in the South with the South Vietnamese. That was a transformational experience. I should share that with you sometime. And it ended up that, you know, just by the grace of God, I got out of there and didn't get killed myself. I had a lot of instances where I should not have made it. But luckily, we were still standing and still had, you know, taken the hill. After on the 9th, which was the last day up there, we hadn't been resupplied since we got up there. So we were all out of food. We went 3 days without water. On the last afternoon on the 9th, we'd gone in on, or pardon me, on the 13th, we'd gone in on the 5th. I remember I asked Sergeant Long to tell me how many people were there. And that's when he came back and told me we had 69 enlisted men and 7 officers left. And then he told me, guess what? We only have 20 rounds of ammunition left per man up here. And at that point, I got real clear that we weren't going to make it through that night. Somehow we did. That's part of what I wrote about in the book. And on the 17th, we had a Ranger Battalion come in, and I got a chance to meet my 4th Ranger that I met in Vietnam and in the field. He was a captain. He was with a Vietnamese Ranger company. And when they come in to replace us on top of that hill, it was raining like heck, and it was just cold. You know, you forget in the tropics that, you know, if it's a 60-degree rain and you're standing out in it all the time, and you're skin and bones, it's pretty nasty place to be. But to make a long story short, I took him over a cup of coffee. We sat there for an hour. He was on his 2nd tour in Vietnam. And if you're out there, I don't know what your name was, but I'd love to talk to you and find out how you made out, because it must have been a holy hell for you after we left. We pulled off, spent another couple of weeks going after the NVA. After they secured the top, we had gotten a company, an extra company of men to reinforce us. So we were back up to about 200 strength, and they decided to send us down after the NVA. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the instances that happened, because so many of the stories that Hollywood writes about Vietnam veterans are, you know, we're all a bunch of dope smoking losers, nut jobs, whatever. When I went in the service, I'd already graduated from college, and I was in a 4-year PhD program. I didn't have to go, but my uncle called me a coward, so I decided, as the oldest boy of the World War II generation, I'd go on down and volunteer. So I left after 2 years of graduate school. So I was a fairly well-educated person when I joined up on October 18th, 1968, and started basic training. I remember very vividly we had a situation that I cannot say enough about how well I would not be here, and I'd like to just share one with you. During that 13 days up there, one night we were there about 2 days, and they sent us off the hill to try and find the NVA. We found all the NVA we wanted. It was, you know, quite an extensive thing. I think I called in 8 or 9 airstrikes, you know, in that combat time. And then they told us to stay off. We had a company on top of the hill, and we had 2 companies with us, and we set up an NDP. That night, the NVA attacked us at about 2 a.m. in the morning. They mortared us, and they were trying to break through our lines. We had a very low ceiling. My Major Andrews came up and ended up flying in and out of the clouds. We're on the side of a mountain. We got maybe a 200 to 400 foot ceiling, so you can get down. There are parachute flares coming down. The NVA are, you know, attacking our outer perimeter. And I'm up on top of a rock pile, and they're trying to target our fighting positions and then put a hole in our lines and then charge us. And luckily, as it turns out, there was a big bunch of commotion. We'd already had 2 Cobras come in, and they got the mortar that they were mortaring us with, thanks to Major Andrews being able to see where the flashes were. But I can remember we lost air superiority for a few minutes, and that's when the NVA decided they were going to try and overrun us. And they started at our front lines, and luckily somebody must have been alive in the fox on our outer perimeter, because Major 2 and I were up there on a pile of rocks looking out over the uphill side of our NDP. 2 Claymore mines went off, blew a hell of a hole in there, and they all hit the ground. I remember their officers got up. They were trying to get them up and get the guys to move forward, and they really didn't want to come any more forward. And I could hear the Cobra coming in. We didn't have any more flares. You know, he somehow got down below the clouds and kind of edged his way up towards us. I popped yellow smoke, told him I had yellow smoke, and we were about to be overrun. He said, they're too close. I said, shoot or we're dead. And he started firing and blew them right back out of our perimeter. I cannot say enough about the quality of other Americans that were around me. I mean, it just was unbelievable. And by the grace of God, I hope they all made it home, because I got home because of them. Make a long story short, I felt that the South Vietnamese Army was conducting the war 100% at that point in time. They did things differently than the American Army. They didn't have any rules of engagement. Their treatment of prisoners was a little bit different. They just had a different way of conducting the war, and it didn't make it right, didn't make it wrong. I mean, we could get an artillery barrage in under 5 minutes. Normally, you could get your first spot around on the ground. We had air support. You know, we didn't have any of this checking with anybody. You just called up and said, I need help, and they were there. Anyway, let's go on to a little bit of a different situation. I also had, you know, the great thing about the Army is once you do a good job, they send you to the next mountain to do it again. And we went over to Nui Koto and started taking it. That was the mountain that they were initially bombing after we had the top of Nui Jai secured, and we had moved most of the NVA units back into Cambodia off of that mountain. We went over to Nui Koto, went up. We climbed up, assaulted up there, took a night defensive position up there. We were there 2 nights when we got set up. And on the second night, there was a strong wind coming in off the Gulf of Thailand on a steady uphill breeze. It was blowing right off the Gulf of Thailand, right up the hill, right through our location. And guess what happened? The NVA popped tear gas and attacked us. We didn't have any gas masks. And all I can remember was leaning and got down against the tree when the gas hit me, and I started gagging and coughing, and I could hear them, you know, approaching. They were walking right up the hill, right behind the tear gas as it was hitting our South Vietnamese troops. And I remember saying, dear God, what are we going to do now? And it wasn't 10 seconds later, the wind shifted and went right back at the NVA. They didn't have tear gas masks either. It was a fiasco, but thank God. I mean, you talk about an answer to prayer. I've seen some. I mean, I truly have. The big Ranger in the sky has really taken good care of me. And I am blessed to have had that kind of support. I think in conclusion, I had a couple other stories I wanted to tell, but I think maybe it'd be best to maybe just try question and answers. But I'd like to say something. I'm 77 today. I have watched all you younger Rangers for a long, long time. You've done a hell of a job. I mean, I have no way, I have nothing but awe and gratitude and appreciation for how you've kept this country safe for almost 75 years now. And thank you for all of your service. Thank you for all that you've done. I mean, truly phenomenal. And with that, I think I'll close and go back and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Gary. We appreciate the comments and the insight. The first question I've got here came in over email from one of our viewers, and he is wondering if you can talk a little bit about what your experience was like in Ranger School specifically, and how some of the lessons that you may have learned there apply not just to what you experienced in the military, but how they may impact your life now, even at your late age, 80 years of youth.
That's an excellent question. I believe the Ranger School is what I call a transformative event. It literally changes you into a different person than you were before you started. You know, you're not living in the right, wrong, I have to make you wrong to make me right. You live in the domain of possibility where you select a mission, see a mission, and whatever. When I went through Ranger School, it was divided into 3 phases. Basic at, Fort Benning. Dahlonega was the mountain phase, and I went through the swamp phase. I was the lead swimmer on the bridge team, and I actually got a 20-point good spot. I was a 2-sport college athlete at the time when I went in. I had lettered in swimming and soccer, and I also was president of my college fraternity my senior year. So I was a fairly good athlete. I think basically, I remember the pit, being in there and beating the heck out of each other and learning how to, knife fight and do all that other stuff. As far as we did everything in combat boots, including climbing mountains. All we had were our fatigue jacket and pants. And I think probably the hardest couple of days at Ranger School for me were the last 3 days of the mountain phase. We walked for 3 solid days in kind of a sleet storm. And I can remember saying, I can make it 1 more hour. When I finally got down to I can make it 1 more minute, we finally rounded a corner and got in the deuce and a half, and I shivered while we went back. If you missed your resupply, you went hungry. I can remember eating grasshoppers on a butane lighter. I can remember in Vietnam, I ate anything off the land. And I believe that Ranger School transformed who I am as a man. And combat sharpened those skills. I came back and started my own business because I felt, hey, can't ever be worse than this. They're not going to eat me. They're not going to shoot me. And if I can succeed in running my own business, then I have a great deal of freedom. And that's basically what happened. And I was very fortunate. I had, a profession to get into. And by the grace of God, Texaco hired me. And the oil and gas business at that time was about as veteran friendly as you can get. I think the things of determination, going beyond your means, working day and night, were all very important in owning your own business. And I would highly suggest if you're thinking about it, what do you got to lose? You can always go back and work for the other people, do something else. And it really transformed my life as far as being able to have the confidence to go on out and try something new. I know that in my business profession, I've had to retrain myself numerous times. I had to learn how to be a petroleum engineer. I learned how to be a geophysicist. I learned how to be a landman. I learned how to do, become a pumper. I learned how to run pipelines. All of which I didn't know, and all of which going through Ranger School gave me the confidence to do.
The next question comes from our Facebook crowd. We've got a viewer that wants to know what your experience was like writing the book. How did you make the decision to go from not being an author into exploring self-publishing, and whether you've got any tips for somebody who might be interested in it in the future?
Oh, yes. Well, I never, ever thought of writing a book. What happened and how I got involved in that was in 1998, my oldest daughter was a senior in high school, and the social studies teacher asked me to come on down and talk about it. So I said, well, I really don't have much interest. My wife, I ended up saying I would go on down and talk to the high school class about Vietnam. What I read was that Jane Fonda and SDS were the most important thing during the Vietnam War. I really think Jane Fonda committed treason, and the Students for Democratic Society were all the drug hippie communist guys in my college, and I wasn't a big fan of them. But anyway, I went in, gave a talk for one day. I came home, and that social studies teacher had every one of those kids write me a thank you note. So this is 1997. That was the first time I'd ever gotten a thank you for your service since I left the Army in 1971. I went in for a couple of more years as my kids went through. I have 4 children, and they all graduated from the same high school up here in the middle of nowhere in Rangeley, Colorado, Northwest Colorado. And my oldest daughter, who's now a dentist, finally turned to me in about 2008, it would have been early 2009, and said, "Dad, you got to write this stuff down. We're not going to be able to remember it." And I made a mistake and said, "I will do that." And I started writing 2 hours, 3 hours every morning from, I would get up early before I had to run my other business, and I would write for a couple of hours. I made an outline. I picked out high points that I could remember very good. I was very lucky. I had colored slides of where I was. They declassified the maps a couple of years after. I finished my first draft in about 6 months, and then the manuscript just sat there. It took me 10 more years to finish, mainly because it was so reactive and I was just having a tough time. I have PTSD pretty bad, and part of the PTSD condition for me is procrastination. And I just really struggled sometimes. But to make a long story short, I would strongly recommend your children, your grandchildren, the rest of the Ranger community, if you have anything to share, any desire to write a book, please contact me. I will tell you what I went through and how I did it. I basically self-published on Amazon. There are many other things. I found an excellent editor because I'm a scientist, not a writer. I could tell stories, but writing them down in the King's English is a little different. And I will be happy to help anyone that I can with that process. I think you guys have done such a great job. There have to be millions of stories out there, and it ain't bragging if you've done it. And my request is you go ahead and memorialize those for your children and grandchildren and for the country. I think the country needs to know what happened. I mean, us Vietnam veterans have been so slandered, by the movie industry and everything. And by gosh, that wasn't my experience. I never saw anybody mistreated. I never saw anybody do anything wrong. I only saw the highest integrity of my fellow citizens. So if you have any questions, please get a hold of me. I live in Rangeley, Colorado. I don't know, probably shouldn't give out my phone number here, but I'd be happy to leave it with Travis or something, and he can maybe email you my contact information. Thank you.
A couple of presentations back, we had Major Noble, who was the regimental psychologist for a lot of years, and he talked to the group a lot about mental health and some of the struggles that young Rangers have gone through over the years, and some of the things that the regiment is doing these days in order to address those proactively. And you had mentioned just a few minutes ago that you struggled with a little bit of mental health issues and PTSD issues yourself. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about what your experience has been dealing with those issues since you've been out of the service. Now, obviously, it's been a large number of years compared to some of our younger Rangers, but I think it would be interesting to hear how you've tackled those issues and what your experience may have been in your day versus what some of our younger guys are experiencing nowadays.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And yes, I would be happy to do that. I do write about that at the back part of my book. One of the things that happened to me was I came back, and it just was not okay to say that you were a military veteran. So I had no one. I had a disability for ulcerative colitis. When I refused to go back into the VA, I couldn't tell whether the doctor was male or female. I guess it's a generational thing. I just walked out of the VA, and they reclassified me. It wasn't until I had 2 divorces. I married 2 wonderful beautiful college girls. My marriage lasted about a year and a half in both cases. They could not handle my compartmentalization and my isolation, I guess, and my overreaction to normal things that would happen. And I finally married a young lady who we have 4 children together. We've been together over 44 years now, and she has been the best thing that ever happened to me. Doesn't mean we haven't had our issues, but we basically sat down and agreed that we would try and stick it out. So she dragged myself off to marriage counseling, and she dragged me off to every self-help course that we could do. And when I had to chase my oldest daughter down because she tried to commit suicide, I decided that probably I was part of the problem also. So I went down to the VA in Grand Junction and got an appointment. After the psychiatrist was there and he asked the question, "What did you do in the war?" I talked for about 5 minutes, and he said, "You have PTSD." And I said, "What's that?" Since then, I've had over 5 gentlemen that have I've seen. I think it's been very important for me. I think the big high points for me were the discovery that my brain had been rewired, that I basically subconsciously viewed everything in the world. If I was hungry, if I was thirsty, if something startled me, if something was happening to my children or my family, I'd get, angry. I had to learn how to manage, that. And once my brain was rewired, my instantaneous response was either fight, run, or freeze. Well, being a Ranger, I didn't have a lot of freezing. Procrastination would be the way that showed up for me. But I did learn to do a couple of things, and I have learned to do a couple of things. One is I learned combat breathing. I try and, inhale for 4, hold it for 4, exhale for 4, and then start the process, hold it for 4. That tends to get me back into the present. I'll also ask myself the question, is this my PTSD running me, or, am I in control? And I am now somewhat conscious enough that I can see the difference. It still doesn't get me unstuck. I had an episode 2 weeks ago. Look, you leave the war, but the war never leaves you. And I think the day that I joined the VFW and started to write this book and embrace my military service rather than put it on a shelf, compartmentalize it, never talk about it, and hide it, was a significant turning point for me. The other issue that I've learned is transference of trauma. That is a big, big issue, because if you have PTSD, guess what? Your wife and your kids are going to have it, no matter how mentally sane and how little of it you have. That for me was a tremendous incentive. I want to say to seek guidance and counseling. I was functional. I drank a lot when I first got back from the service. The biggest problem is you come out of the Rangers and you come out of combat and you're really a highly trained killer. And that isn't something that you can talk about or do in civilian society very well. That part of me, when I first came back and got back in graduate school on my PhD, I wouldn't go hunting. I had a good friend who came up. He asked, would you take me bird hunting? I love to bird hunt, and we lived in a wonderful place in South Central New York for grouse and woodcock hunting. I went out with him, and I finally decided I could maybe pick up a shotgun if I ate what I shot, but I still had a real problem. So what I did was I took up archery hunting. It was a place that I could channel the combat skills that I had, and it was a solitary thing. I could get time by myself, and it really helped me. It really helped me to channel some of those skill sets that you develop in the military that really you can't kind of talk about in civilian society. And I think it's been a godsend. In fact, last fall, I shot at the age of 76. I shot a deer with my bow and arrow, 30 yards, one shot with my Matthews, no cam. And I still can pull 63 pounds, which I think for an old geezer is probably not too bad. And I'm looking forward to going again this year. And it's given me something to keep me in shape and giving me something to distract me. But I think the biggest thing is marry well, find a woman that loves you for who you are, and don't be afraid to go on in and realize that your brain has truly been reprogrammed, and you need to get on top of what that is so that your family doesn't end up with a bunch of issues. All my kids have PTSD. My daughter, that's a dentist, probably got it maybe some of the hardest of all, but she's very functional, but it's just difficult to watch. Anyway, that's about all I got. I hope that answered that question.
Thank you very much, Gary. I wanted to take just a minute here and express the gratitude of the Ranger Association for you coming on today and speaking to us. You know, we typically ask speakers come in and talk for about 20 minutes and answer 5 to 10 minutes worth of questions, and we're now pushing 6 o'clock, and you have stayed well beyond what we asked you to do, and we are grateful for your willingness to share your time with us. My hope is that everybody who had a chance to, or who wanted a chance to ask a question today was able to get it into us. I know that we weren't probably able to get to all of them, but we want to make sure that we are respectful of Gary's time. For those who may have other questions, please feel free to reach out to either me or any of the other members of the association or the officers of the association, and we can put you in touch with Gary. We will also have a copy of this video presentation posted to both Facebook and to the YouTube channel, probably in about a week and a half. So please keep an eye out there if you'd like to watch it again and refresh yourself on anything that we talked about tonight. Gary, Godspeed to you, and hope you and your family have a great weekend. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. It's been an honor to speak to you.